Hello, everyone. I guess it's Friday afternoon. It's snowing here in Philadelphia. I hope you guys are well. I'm just doing a little bit of an impromptu live here, sort of weaving together some recent experiences that I have in relation to a really awesome playlist of clips that I put together from a Michael Levin presentation with two grad students about scalable cognitive architecture and bioelectrical communication among embryos. And a friend forwarded that to me. Yeah, it was actually very helpful to revisit and get a lot of new information. I think I pulled like 18 clips from that. And so it was that piece, and I've been going through, so I watched it. It's about like an hour and a half long talk. And so I've been working on some sewing, making some pot holders, and I'm trying to make some progress on a quilt that I've set aside for a couple months. And so I was listening to it, and then I would stop, and then I would go back, and I would make some clips. So it's taken me about 2 or 3 days to really put my attention onto this. And so I would definitely recommend you guys bookmarking that playlist because I've sort of reorganized it and in a way that makes sense to me to convey some of these bigger ideas. And in the meantime, as I'm doing this, like my 25-year-old over the range microwave died. And so I was trying to get a replacement for that, only the sizes don't fit and the tile is in the way. So like that wasn't working. And then the sewing machine was gunking up and then that wasn't working. And then today I actually had like a strange human weather event where a person that I've been in touch with, who's known me for years, like since before the lockdowns, essentially sort of like instigated this really inflammatory text back and forth. And it sort of speaks to the stuff that I was dealing with the Levin playlist, because I think a lot of this was about information fields and being influenced by group communications and scaling up cognitive architectures. And they were focused at the cellular level, but it has profound implications for socio-technical systems, especially in the context of Web3. And so I don't want people to think that like this channel has just turned to like less research and more my own personal observations. I have a huge map that I'll link to that I've been working with Steffers and my friend Washington Sean, and then Jason and Leo and Lynn and I have a recording set up for next week to really go into this idea of next generation quantum computing having to do with structured water and biology and fascia and microfluidics and a lot of it actually has to do with these electrical fields and structured water and cellular structure and microtubules. So it's all interrelated, both the Levin stuff and the fascia stuff. And I'm interested if people want to look. I keep thinking I'm done with the map, but then just yesterday, there was a whole section that was coming together around Levin and his being funded by something called the Emerald Gate Foundation. And at first I thought it was like the other Gates Foundation, but no, it's Emerald Gate. You guys should look it up and definitely look at their collaborators, which include everything from like Stanford and the University of Utah to IONS and the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And so like I still have to flesh that part of the map out. And I've been putting up some clips about that today. But I just want to touch on, before I get all of the more specific stuff out about the fascia and the computing and the structured water, like I've heard from a couple different quarters, because I'm mostly outside of the feed stuff these days. And, you know, generally it's actually kind of nice because, again, I have sort of a small cohort of people and we're working on researching things that feel meaningful for us in terms of sense making about the world that we're in. And so we're not pulled and yanked in all these different directions about our consciousness. But I feel like bubbling up in the field, and again, with Levin, there's a lot about these information fields, like electrical information fields, that's steering people's consciousness. And so I think that this exchange that I had, again, now I haven't not met this person in person. Um, and again, you just never know what's going on when something shows up from a phone, like what exactly that is, if it's strictly attached to that person. And again, where that person's consciousness is. But the one thing that we can control is sort of how we react to the situation. And so I'm taking this not as a jab at this person, because I think in some ways they're probably caught up in an information field that doesn't make them feel very good. And it certainly wasn't making me feel very good either. But I have enough wherewithal understanding the gaming environment and this electrical information field environment to make some presumptions about it. And so if you guys haven't watched, I have a 2-part series that I did with Jason with Michael Matias. My friend Washington Sean had alerted me to him. He's at UC Santa Cruz. And it's talking about sort of real life role-playing games and AI and social role game playing behaviors, and essentially, turning the world into a game and having these certain goals where you move individual people as agents, some of whom are actually attached to real people, like through digital twinning, to accomplish certain ends. And so one of the games that Michael Matias came up with was about like the prom, and they like wanted to break up this couple and then put this woman over with this other guy. And like there were a number of different intermediary steps involved, and they could use AI to program that. And so, and I'm not saying this definitely happened, but I can't imagine that this person who I had an exchange with woke up today and said, I think I'm going to provoke Allison, a person that I've actually seemed to have valued her insights in our dialogue today, to a point that she blocks my number and doesn't ends the connection, right? Like, I don't think this person literally woke up today with that in mind, but there was something in the course of events that had happened, at least leading up to today, or maybe today in particular, things that came through their feed that led them to this certain provocative behavior. And the only thing I could do was really decide how I was going to react to it. And at this point, because I think it is an electrical field thing, I simply just said, like, I can't be your scapegoat. And, I think this is displaced whatever aggression you have here. And I'm like blocking this, this is over now, not because I can see, like, again, I think it's not really necessarily personal. I think it was something energetic. And I feel like I've had this intuition about these energy fields for a long time. And I know I get a lot of flack online about early on Facebook blocking people because I had a public profile, and then people I didn't want to engage with, I would block because you have that option. But that became this point of contention, like, oh, Allison blocks people. But I think I felt even at that point that there was an energetic overreach, and that I was very clear about my boundaries and how I was approaching things. And so socially, like, that was how I would break energetic entanglements, was through the blocking mechanism. Now, like, ultimately, that was not a good long-term solution, and stepping off of those platforms, both Facebook and then eventually Twitter for the second time, made sense. But even when I was participating in sort of a private discussion board, when that blew up, I just said, listen, it's not enough for me just to not log into the profile anymore. Like, I want to have my profile removed because there's an energetic entanglement there. And so I think that the Levin Labs understanding of these scalable cognitive architectures based from cells all the way up to socio-technical systems understands the power of these electrical and energetic fields, and that manipulating these fields, force fields, through various mechanisms connected to our psychology is a key aspect of how they're accomplishing their strategic ends. So anyway, I think the crux of this provocative conversation was that essentially, so there was someone shared a Substack, and again, I would say that the Substacks are definitely a whole embodiment of the ant computer. Like, no, and I'm not judging people who either have a Substack or participate on the Substacks, but I think that whole thing with Celia, like for me, made it clear that there's a lot of really powerful energy in those Substacks. And you just, if you're going to wade into that, you need to understand that that's how it works. And so this Substack, that the person said, oh, this person really has it figured out. Like they're great. Now, I would say in the exchange, it was generally the other person sharing information with me, and then I would respond. I wasn't necessarily always sending stuff to this person. It was more the other direction in. But I was happy. Like we had up until today, like I thought we had a good back and forth. And essentially this Substack person, and it wasn't a terrible thing. I'm sure it was about like us being, creative beings and having this sort of essence, and that's what the quote unquote, they wanted. But my difference of opinion with this person's take was that they were talking about that our essence is the opposite of what they envision. And this author imagined that what was envisioned was a cold, flat world where orders are followed by programmable minds. Now, I would say maybe a year or two ago, like halfway into the lockdowns, before I understood complexity theory and emergence, I would maybe have been in line with that, because I didn't understand the idea of degrees of freedom and how the Web3 smart contracts would have this flexibility, and the role of participation and emergence in the game that's being laid out. I think actually what is desired, and I can't say that I know, I think there's a lot of emphasis on the they and the cabal, or whatever the they is, that there is a they, and then we do judgment on the they. And I was very strongly, like, I haven't, like, early on, I was definitely all about the judgment part. And that was an aspect, I think, of what contributed to the difficulties I have with my young adult child, was my rigidity about like the judgment part. And so I've like reflected on that. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm co-signing any of what's being proposed. But the role that I've taken in response to being a strongly emotionally judgy person, that didn't work. That didn't work for me personally, and it didn't really change the course of events. And so to me, the smart thing to do would be to be self-reflective, consider how things are, and then adjust, right? I mean, why would we pick a course that is ineffective and then just keep doing it? It doesn't, I mean, to me, that doesn't make, it didn't work for me. And so when I realized that being a loud and judgmental activist with very strong opinions, which I have been for the first, at least like the first couple years of the lockdowns, that it didn't accomplish what I had hoped that it would accomplish, I regrouped. And so my current positioning, which doesn't mean I'm going to do this indefinitely, is I'm going to be the thoughtful observer, right? I'm going to try to figure out as clear as I can get of what is this game. And my being able, I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but my lived experiences that have led me to step back from the feed, first with Bantam Joe and Facebook, and then on Twitter, and that came about like with Raul. My stepping back off of those platforms let me be in that observer role, because I am somewhat distanced. Now, that doesn't mean I'm outside of it, because I'm still in contact with people who are connected to the feed. And so none of us are totally distant, but we're a little bit more removed. And so the role that I've chosen for myself at this time is to be an aware observer and a researcher who's laying out the pieces, who's making very extensive maps, and who's trying to come up with new concepts. And in doing that, and I've talked about this quite often, setting aside the judgment, the harsh judgment, gives me space and latitude to do that with more resources to put into the sorting out of what this thing is than if I was running around being frantic and angry all the time. Because I do think that the frantic, angry persona advantages the system that wants to keep people traumatized and unstable. Now, in the case, and this person essentially said, like, the outrage game, you're doing it wrong. So when I was looking into complex systems analysis and evolutionary theory, there would be a goal, right? A goal for a system. And there would be a goal assigned, and then there would be various decisions being made in the process towards a goal. And if there were agents advancing the goal, and those that got closer to the goal would be reinforced, like the neural network, and those that were not contributing to the goal would be pruned, right? And I've talked about this before. That's the fitness landscape. You know, you have a simulation, you have the agents, you have the goal, you have a situation, you run the simulation against that particular set state, and then you see the results, and then you edit, and then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And so one of the things, so the Levin talk was with 2 PhD students in his lab, the Levin lab at Tufts. And ultimately it was about looking at groups of embryos. One was about groups of embryos, and one was about trachea cells, and about bioelectrical communication and field communication towards certain outcomes. The communication of, and the idea was in the embryo paper was that the more embryos you had, that they shared an information field about resolving a problem. So they would go through and scratch the embryos or cause harm to them, or introduce a toxin or an RNA that was designed to mess up the embryo. And that collectively the embryos could problem solve the perturbation, and then through the wisdom of the crowd, right? And we've talked about that with Jeffrey Yass, the wisdom of the crowd, and then they could share the better solution, right? So they had the example of, like, so this is how we do it correctly, right? This is how we grow an arm correctly. You're doing it wrong. Like, don't do it like that. Do it like me. I've had this perturbation and I still know how to do the arm right. Look at me, right? And so, and then this other woman was working on these things called anthrobots, which were tracheal cells that had cilia that could be turned into a biorobot, not through genetic manipulation, but through morphogenetic energy field manipulation and epigenetics, the epigenetics of these cells. And then to use these biobots on the one hand within a biomedicine context, but she actually had a background in architecture, and her concept was she wanted to use engineered tissues, again, not genetically edited, but morphic field edited, to create dynamic self-building architectures that were quote unquote sustainable because they pulled carbon from the environment, right? And you know, and I had someone comment on one of the pieces that I uploaded today, like, oh, like, I'm really interested in dynamic architectures. And I'm like, well, but I'm against transhumanism. And I'm like, well, then you need to figure out your morality about engineering non-human cell cultures towards turning them into building material, like zero carbon building materials. Are we doing this? Or is it just anthropocentric? Or are we just not transhuman, but we're okay with doing that to yeast or maybe a trachea cell? Does that count as transhumanism if you turn a trachea cell into a biobot and then have it build a biobrick in a spaceship for space colonization? Like, that's the stuff that we're talking about, but people don't even know enough to have an informed idea about any of this. And so the position that I've taken at the moment, which is not to say I'm going to do this forever. I didn't do it previously. I had a different kind of persona that, again, didn't accomplish what I had hoped it was accomplished. And then we changed, right? And so the current persona is, what the heck happened? What are we in? What are the mechanisms? And then let's bring it public. Let's try to educate the public enough that we can recognize the contours of the gaming environment and then decide if we're participating or if we're going to agree to do this collectively, right? Yelling about a cabal or they people who are evil and anti-God or anti-life or this or that or the other, and just railing against it and being right, that might reaffirm our archetype of, like, the spiritual warrior. And that might work for some people. I'm not even saying that, like, people can't make that choice. People can totally adopt the archetype of the spiritual warrior and then be pissed at people like me who are are trying to be a calm observer, right? But in the fitness landscape of the self-assembling socio-technical architecture, I'm doing it wrong. And so I just, and again, this is not to yell at the person who like instigated this very mean-spirited exchange with me today. It wasn't anything to do with me. This was just out of nowhere, because I think the human weather field, whatever is in the feed today, just got it in the person. They're like, maybe there's something because I'm uploading all this stuff to YouTube, which of course is Google Alphabet, that said, hey, dial it in. That woman is paying far too much attention to bioelectrical signaling communication. She's trying to calmly present into the public view what the nature of this socio-technical gaming landscape looks like. So let's try to perturb her situation, right? And ultimately, understanding the game better, these perturbations, if you're able to overcome them, you're actually more resilient. So in the judgment, what is this? Is this, the creative force of the universe challenging Allison so that I become more resilient for the next round that's coming? Is it some evil force that's trying to squish me down? Like, I don't know. Like, at this point, I'm trying to observe and then share what I observe with other people in case it makes sense. Because part of this map that I've been working on with the fascia and the water deals with the wellness company and Foster Colson. And I would just say, like, several people have done, starting in November or December, some really good deep dives into what's happening with this wellness company. And I've been mapping all of that out, and that was great. And I have references to that in their work in the map. But there is a certain resistance architecture that, in my opinion, whatever energetic forces are shaping this, that there is a goal for what the quote unquote resistance is supposed to look like. And as far as I can tell, again, in broad strokes, it seems like this idea of concierge healthcare and wellness attached to nutraceuticals, a lot of which are loaded with nanoparticles, are using influencers to create social architectures under the banner of resistance, to create a community, a self-identified team that will be very conductive to liquid quantum computing in the name of freedom and liberty and agency. Like, that's what it's looking like to me very clearly. And I've been like, I'm not a joiner. So I've been outside of all of that for a while, and I'm not invested in any of this. But I can see when you're talking about remote using energy, which is what Levin is talking about, using energetic fields, which is what the feed is, to psychologically and remotely influence groups of people into self-assembling social architectures. That's what's happening. And once we understand the ant computer and the wisdom of the crowd and the intelligence and the pheromones and the stigmergy, that's all of social media. And I mean, I'm not saying I'm outside of it, but because clearly I'm doing a YouTube live thing, like this is a stigmergic thing. Now, mostly I'm kind of just over in my own corner. And it may sound like I'm talking down to the people who are participating in the self-assembling architectures. And maybe it feels that way. In retrospect, I'm not trying to make you feel bad if that's you. But I think you deserve to have background information on the game board so that you can make an informed choice about what you're participating in. I mean, that's where I'm at. And if you know, and you're choosing to do stigmergy and clicks and likes and comments and these substacks and these feeds and all these things and share, even if the thing is simply sharing a link from a trusted source. And again, I know I'm not outside of that because I'm sure people do share links to my stuff. So there is a stigmergic signal in there. I don't think it's being amplified, but I'm not trying to say I'm better. Just understand the mechanism. Like that's what I'm really asking for people. Understand the mechanism and then try to, I think, for the people we care about in our social circles and our loved ones, to talk with them about it if they're open, because clearly, like my family wasn't open to it, but so that we can navigate the landscape better. Like what I'm doing is I'm trying to see the landscape and open the landscape up for people to see. So, let me just look through my notes. Yeah. So, what is the game? Now, I think this person was very emotionally had very strong emotions because of the impacts of what has unfolded medically on the people around her. And I think that there's still this idea around depopulation, which has not been my frame. My frame is that if you follow, again, and I may be wrong, I'm open to being wrong, but if you follow that the goal is quantum computing in which our embodied intelligence is used as a sacred sensor network with access to the field of divine creation, it might make sense to create scenarios where we would agree to be or welcome that our biology be monitored through wearables or nanotech or brain pills all the time because of some sort of chronic health conditions. But erasure of your resource doesn't make sense in that logic. Now, you can disagree and say, like, I don't think I'm totally all about the Georgia Guidestones and whatever. That's not where I'm at. But the framing of the died suddenly, the turbo cancer, all of these things, I would say, again, not to say that things aren't happening. But what I tried to convey to this person, because I think they felt I was detached and I wasn't sufficiently appreciating the intensity of the harm and the horror and the carnage, and that essentially I was doing it wrong. In the fitness landscape of how the resistance looks, I was doing it wrong because I was not becoming emotionally entangled in this situation, which had its own compounding narratives. Now, and I think there was some implication that I had not suffered my own losses. And I would say, if anybody's been following my story, I've had a lot of profound losses over the past couple years. Maybe they don't fall into the categories of what this other person was considering a loss, but I've had a lot of losses, and I've been part of the reason that I do the research that I do is to make sense of what has happened, which I think does relate a lot to frequency and energy fields, and using remote frequency to stigmergically create, like catalyze disconnect or connection, right? And so there were things that happened to me in my life that didn't make sense as I understood the world to be pre-lockdown. And so understanding these systems of stigmergy, of the ant computer, of force fields, of social gaming, of socio-technical systems, of scalable cognitive architectures, that helps me take it less personally. Now, I think maybe some people think I'm just a machine or whatever. Like, I think this person now, I don't think in retrospect, they'll probably wake up tomorrow and say, wow, like hopefully think that actually wasn't kind. But like I've been crying a lot the last 2 days for being alone. It's cold, it's winter, it's gray. I'm cooking for myself. My entire identity as a loving wife and a mother has evaporated, right? And I'm in the process of like quietly waiting for this transformation to begin, which I can't do until the spring. but it's not easy. And honestly, part of it is I've had, even though I'm off of the feed, some really challenging emotional exchanges through emails and things with people recently, where I think that there's certain presumptions because I do this in my own personal way, that have me sort of questioning what I'm really doing about sharing my findings in a more broad public way. Again, like I have my small group of people, and I find that really rewarding because we're all like in sympathetic vibration. We're all interested in the same things. We're all like sharing puzzle pieces, and it's very rewarding. And so I have that. And I am doing it for myself. I mean, I remember at one point my mom was like, "Why are you doing this? Is it just to feel important?" And I'm like, "No, because I want to understand. Like, I actually do want to understand. And I think documenting my journey helps some other people understand. But I'm not doing it because I want to feel important. Like, that's not what's motivating me. And I think you guys will understand that, because if I were trying to just be some big person, I would be shilling myself all over TikTok or whatever, you know. I'm here on YouTube because I don't really know the better place. I'm not doing those ridiculous like BitChute Rumble things. So I'm just sticking to like where I started, and this is WordPress, and YouTube is where I started. So this is where I am. It's as imperfect as it is. So I'm really questioning, like, I mean, sort of these remarks about like, oh, maybe I'm too smart, or this person today essentially sort of saying that my research is a luxury because people are dropping dead everywhere, and that like I'm just doing like metaphysical luxury things, and that it doesn't matter, or I'm going to lose people because I'm distant, like I'm detached from the horror. I haven't like immersed myself in the horror, and I'm not every moment talking about that. So I'm going to lose people because that's where people are. And honestly, understanding these energetic fields, I think it advantages the system to keep people in horror. And what my response was, I think that's the case. I think that was the case with Yemen. That was the case with Ukraine. That's the case with Gaza. There were many horrible things. I think that was the case at the beginning of lockdowns, when it was, you're going to kill grandma. There was a horror tempo that you were supposed to resonate with vibrationally, of the horror, the carnage. Like, this person can't even see that the carnage they're talking about is the exact inverse of the narrative of the carnage that we started the whole thing with. Like, they don't see how it's connected. And I think that I said, if my engagement with it would ameliorate it, would make it better, if my inflicting judgment on the bad guys, whoever they are, I mean, at this point, I don't know who the they is. And so it's really hard to cast judgment when you really don't know what is motivating this. I mean, after reading the Tchaikovsky books, the Adrian Tchaikovsky books, like The Children of Ruin and all that, I'm like, I could be an interdimensional biofilm. Am I railing against the interdimensional biofilm? It doesn't make sense. I don't know. Now, I could create an identity for myself as a warrior against the they, but I honestly don't know who the they are. I know who some of the subunits of the they are, but the vast scope, I don't know why this is happening. So I'm going to reserve judgment, because ultimately putting my energy into horror scenarios isn't going to change the horror scenario. It's going to entangle me quantum with all of the other people who are entangled in the horror scenario. It's going to suck up my bandwidth to do my important work. I feel it's important. Now, this person clearly considers it a luxury and not valuable. And that's fine for that person. I'm not telling anyone to watch me. I mean, that's part of what I'm trying to deal with. Like, am I even supposed to be here anymore? Because, like, I had someone say, like, I spend more time listening to you than with my significant other. I never ask for that. I'm not asking for that. I don't demand it. If you're here and there's, as I said, there's no leaderboard for engagement, I don't have any super fan groups. I don't keep track of who's clicking and liking and all of that stuff. If you're here, it's because there's something in what I'm saying that helps you in your journey, and that's great. And if it doesn't, don't be here. And don't think that being here somehow entitles you to be able to chime in and tell me how I'm supposed to be. Because I'm just being me. I'm being me according to the course that I need to be to do my work. And at some point, that may mean that our paths diverge. And I've come to an acknowledgement that that happens. That seems to be a natural part of the course. But don't guilt me that my information sharing that I'm doing is too comprehensive or too difficult or too long or takes up too much of your time. Because I'm not demanding anything. You get to choose. And so I'm still just trying to come to terms with that myself of like, do I even want to be here in that way? And I don't know. I think once I get resituated in my new place, I'll have to reevaluate that. So I think that mostly touches on it, but I want to hit on the themes of the Levin playlist, which I really encourage you to read, look at, and I'm going to still continue to build out the Levin connection with Emerald Gate Foundation, which is about consciousness and social solutions and microeconomic systems tied to Stanford and the University of Utah and the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I will say someone emailed me a very interesting insight today about, and I appreciate it because actually it wasn't just here's a random link, but the person had a thought process. Like, I understand that you're looking at games and how we may be involved in gaming environments where we don't understand the actions we're taking in a game, what it is really doing. And they talked about a cancer fundraiser with like an online gaming program where they back-to-back gaming. And I guess there's some way of doing gaming that you're supposed to do them super fast or something. And this person pointed out, they're like, one of the submissions was this guy who trained his Shiba Inu dog, Peanut Butter, to play a really simple game. And he did behavioral operant conditioning with treats and affirmation to get the dog to like press buttons that like, I mean, he was watching the game board and then he would tell the dog which button to push and when, like a red button and a green button, and how long to press it. But the dog was quote unquote playing the game. And it didn't know what the heck it was doing. It was just getting treats, right? And so I would say like, that's how it kind of feels, this exchange in the human weather and the Substack, was that this whole environment, this whole feed environment was a game. I mean, it's a game and we're doing stuff and we don't even know what we're doing. So was this text exchange somehow in a programmed situation that Alphabet is saying, oh, I can't have people spending too much time on scaling cognitive architectures and cellular communication, because that might be complicated if people start to figure out the game. So let's like make sure Allison's microwave doesn't fit and gum up her sewing machine. And then at the top it all off, like have someone she thought was like a nice person send really mean texts, get her discombobulated. But what I'm trying to say is, okay, the only thing I can control of that is how I react. And so like, I have compassion for this person. I'm not here to say that the spiritual warrior archetype has no place. It totally has a place. What I am saying is that the person who's attempting to be a calm, deep observer and facilitator of broader conversations also has a place, right? There are these different archetypes, which is something essentially there's a video clip in there of them talking about these anthrobot cells, and that they have their own archetypes based on epigenetics. Now, the epigenetics relate to, and this is what I'm looking at with the fascia with Steffers and Washington Sean and Leo and Jason and Lynn and stuff, is that there's the structured water within the cell and then the DNA. And then the computing, this quantum computing is happening in the interface between the structured water and the DNA, the information sharing and all of this quote unquote junk DNA and everything. It's really about like transmitting antenna-based information. And that what Levin emphasizes is that really the genetic modification is a very limiting view, that really what's much more interesting is this bioelectrical signaling, and that's happening through the structured water. Now, he also calls it like the extracellular membrane or whatever, but that is really the fascia. He's not calling it the fascia, but it's the fascia. And so it is this interface, and that they're changing the epigenetics, right? And that's what they're doing, like to create these self-assembling tissue architectures, which again, it's not just an anthrobot, in my opinion, it's also using the feed and psychic energetic fields to do that at a socio-technical level, at a societal psychic level, that they're adjusting those. So in the water, they're talking about how your emotional state affects your fascia and the tension and the water, and that affects your DNA. So that's the epigenetics. And that's the place that Levin is playing with, is the epigenetic space. It's everything that's not the DNA, right? So what is the feed doing to the people who are living in the outrage, the blind outrage space? What is that doing to their field, to their epigenetics, to how their body is functioning? I don't think it's doing good things. Now, if you felt like the judgment, outrage, anger was affecting a significant change in the trajectory, but like we're a number of years in, right? I don't see that we're significantly changing policies. I don't see that we're significantly changing the legal system. I don't see that we're significantly healing people. Like if anything, the resistance is like shilling nutraceuticals full of nanotech, right? And getting you to be angry and do things that are going to be bad for your body. So what I'm trying to figure out is like, okay, if this is the game, if the game is electricity, know what the real game, I mean, again, all I can say is like, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. So I'm sure I don't really have a handle on whatever the real game is. I'm sure there's many levels above my pay grade of what other levels of the game that I haven't found yet. But another level of the game above the one that's right out in front of you is this electrical field. So let's know this and figure out, is there a way that this is going to help? Can we figure out a way to at least sidestep it? You know, if Julia Mossbridge is afraid of like nuclear Armageddon as being the chair in the room of possibilities and walking around it, well, then whatever we're afraid of, let's make that the chair in the room and figure out how to walk around it. That's what I'm trying to do. Let's look at what their tools are. And they're not going to come right out and tell us what the tools are. They're going to hint at it. So we have to kind of look sideways at like the angle and the light that's bouncing off the thing to figure out what the tool is. And that's what I'm trying to do. So yeah, so, you know, this person was like, I'm cutting myself off from reality. And I would say, what is reality? We all have different understandings of reality. We can all be presented with a huge bunch of facts, and we can pick and choose among the facts and build our reality. Are you living in a reality that is benefiting you and the people around you to the best of your ability? Like, or are you living in a reality that is disabling and extending disabling bad energy to everybody around you? Now, I'm not co-signing any of this. I'm not co-signing Michael Levin. I'm not saying like, give me some biobots and I want to, but if you know the field, this field stuff, the stuff that happened to me with my family and my coworkers and all the stuff, and even this weird exchange today, this text exchange, it starts to make more sense. I can make sense of it and I don't have to take it as personally. So I don't think I'm being cut off from reality. I think I'm understanding reality and I'm making my own choices about it. And the choices I'm making now are to be the observer. And, you know, early on when I was looking at fitness landscapes, and again, a lot of this work Levin is doing is going to be around cancer. And so what he says is like, we could solve so many diseases if only we could communicate with the cellular collective intelligence and tell it what to build. right? And so this is going to be part of longevity medicine. And of course, it's all personalized. And this is going to be part of cancer research. And that's why, again, I don't believe in the Georgia Guidestone narrative, but I also don't put it out of the realm of possibility that creating a situation where people need a lot of precision medicine to deal with cancer is on the horizon. Yeah, I totally, if that, there's a logic to that. And that's exactly what Levin is doing. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying that, yay, a bunch of people have cancer so we can refine precision medicine. That's not what I'm saying. But I am laying out the pieces to say, this looks like the landscape. What can we take away from that? And I think that is a valid place to stand. Now, I'm not saying that it's the only valid place to stand or that people can't choose their other roles to play, but this is my place to stand for now. Now, the thing about the cancer is if you don't fit in the fitness landscape, if they're like, you know, Allison, ring, ring, or text, beep, 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 you know, have you not heard the feed is doing outrage? The feed is doing panic and anger and outrage. And we kind of dialed in on your page over here in your blog, and you don't seem to be doing it properly. We're going towards our collective goal, which is to get the Resistance Collective to be a decentralized liquid quantum computing system, dosed up with nutraceuticals from your favorite influencers, and bioelectrical ceuticals. We're going to get all your biofield tuned and everything, and you're not doing it. You're not doing the hackable animal narrative, and we're kind of angry about it. And we're going to say that your research doesn't matter and that it's a luxury and that you're disconnected from reality and you're going to lose people because you're not doing us. And in the Levin videos, you'll see like there's two young women who, you know, because he's grooming a whole cadre of people to advance these programs. And one of them is talking about embryos and how the embryos collectively problem solve, right? The wisdom of the crowd, and that they were able to put an agent into the petri dish with all the embryos that would inhibit communication. Now, their findings were that the embryos that were, again, intentionally harmed to see how they would react, that the ones did better the more embryos there were in a cell. And Levin himself says, oh, this is super surprising because you would think that the outcomes if you were doing overcrowding would be worse because for all these other reasons, but they weren't, they were better. So the ones that did the worst, and this is how the woman started her research, was that all the ones that she did as single embryos and exposed to the toxin or the perturbation, they died, all of them. And then they got better outcomes when they had 30 and better at 50. And like at 300 embryos, almost all of them lived all the time. So this was her research. It's interesting, right? And so essentially what they did was when they inhibited communication and exposed the embryos. So maybe you have 50 embryos in a petri dish and they're all connected, but you put a substance that disconnects the communication. So they all think they're alone, even though they're in a dish with 50. And then you put the perturbation, you know, the tetragen or whatever in there. They all do bad because they think they're alone. They think they're singletons. And so the outcomes were as if they were alone in the dish, as opposed to if they had all the other people around them. And so what I'm hearing in this exchange, and I'm sure this person has no idea, but is you are the cancer cell. You are the rogue one who is not doing it right. And we're cutting off your communication. We're going to cut you off because our goal is those who aren't with the program do cell apoptosis, right? You're supposed to suicide yourself for the common good because the common good of the resistance is we're build a biocomputing architecture, a freedom biocomputing architecture. And you're not going along. And Alphabet, whatever Google Alphabet has seen that you're not going along. And we're going to throw up some roadblocks in your way that is going to mess up your communication system. And yeah, you can say shame on me for doing this on Google Alphabet. Yeah, and they're probably right. I mean, and again, once I get resituated, you know, I'm having my second thoughts about not because of like my personal safety, but just like, what is my role? I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not here to pull you away from your loved ones or tell you how to be or poke fingers. Like what I thought I was doing was modeling how my lived experience how through my lived experience, I can examine some of these trends. Again, these trends that I've spent 3 days going through 18 clips from this hour and a half talk, like dynamic notes that say exactly what is happening. And gosh, it happened to me through my stupid phone, right? And now that relationship that I had was severed. Now I made a choice to sever it. It felt, I mean, honestly, I guess I could make a different choice, but making a different choice and continuing to engage with someone who was under the influence, I feel, of a dark energetic field wasn't going to be good for me. So I just cut the tie there, right? But then that is leading directly to this communication jamming. And, you know, it's sad, but it's interesting. So yeah, so I think that's mostly, I think that covers most things. You know, I think that there was a frustration that people don't need the big picture. Big picture is a luxury when people are dying. The bodies are stacking up. You don't need to know the big picture, right? And if you're not out there on the front lines decrying the thing, you must be with them. You must be like agreeing with these technologies. Now, I think anybody who knows me knows that that's not true. I'm trying to understand them. And I think, again, I don't know who the they is and why this is happening. My sense is that, yeah, my best guess right now, kind of wink, wink, and nod, nod, is interdimensional biofilm. Like that's my placeholder for what is behind this system, right? Some sort of mycelial intergalactic architecture. Yeah, I don't know. And so for now, without having like, because I'm not going to fall for the like, here's the 100 people you should yell at. I'm not going to do that anymore. I did that already. So my position is I want to understand it as best I can with the information that's available to the public, which often involves looking glancingly at the shadows cast by things that you can find in the public realm and then trying to read between the lines. And then say, it looks like this. What do you think? Do you have some pieces to add to the puzzle that will clarify some things, that will bring it into more focus? And then let's talk about it. Like, if we're supposed to be, because again, just getting back to this, and I wasn't trying to be nudgy, but this person's idea that what they want is a cold, flat world where orders are followed by programmable minds, that's not how I understand it. Now, I could be wrong, right? But everything that I understand about complexity and emergence makes it seem like, and this is what I told the person, this feels not like a genocide, but like a domestication, right? Because I think this author is right that the essence of us is what is desired, but it's not to flatten it or to erase our essence, which is weird because the whole fitness landscape is to try to homogenize. So it's very strange to me how many freedom people want to tell me I'm doing it wrong. Like there's only one way to be a freedom person. But it's not to flatten or erase, it's to harness, right? Now, it's not completely open, right? You step onto the game board and then the smart contracts and the Web3 and the energy fields create a state of play. I mean, it's like any game. Like there's certain parameters. And then the state runs, the simulation runs, and then the ledger tracks the outcomes and prunes the ones that don't advance the goal and enhances the ones that do, and then runs it again. But it is our connection to the creative field, often in the subconscious, because I have another playlist and I would, that's equally important, really. And probably a lot of people are just like scratching their heads wondering why I did this playlist, but it's Mark Johnson, he worked with George Lakoff on this idea of metaphor and physicality and the intersection of aesthetics and art and culture in making meaning. And they've been working together for like 30 years, since the 80s. He's out of University of Oregon, which is another partner in this Emerald Gate project that's funding Levin. And so he's talking about the body, how the body makes meaning. And I think that's really central, is that this kinesthetic, crystalline, embodied intelligence is a core to what it is that is of interest. But it needs an embodied intelligence. It the AI agents running around in the multiverse don't have the connection to the field. It's our tether to the sacred that is what is desirable. And again, it's not an unlimited circumstance, but it is open-ended within the constraints of the game board that is as it is set up. And to my way of thinking, that is a very different scenario than, you know, that what is wanted is the opposite of our essence, that they want a cold, flat world. Everything that I've read about complexity emergence is they want disruptive innovation, and they want to capture it in a ubiquitous spatial computing, ubiquitous sensing environment. And that's what's happening through sociotechnical systems. And again, that's what Levin is focused on, scaling cognitive architecture and diverse minds. Because there's another clip that I uploaded. It was in conjunction with the Templeton Foundation, which, you know, I've done a whole talk about the Templeton Foundation, again, funding free markets, high-level theoretical physics, religion, and character. And he's talking about diverse intelligences and figuring out how to communicate with diverse intelligences. And I think that is going to be through different kinds of linguistic systems. And I have a clip I put up from Neri Oxman about these globes that are data sets with they're like additive printed glass globes with like swirly designs that represent data sets. And it's these kinds of artifacts that are going to be the communication. It's going to be sonic, acoustic, but not how we commonly understand it as linguistic. It's going to be tied to the body and movement. And even, you know, I've been looking at this woman, Veda Austin, and her idea around hydroglyphs, these frozen crystalline artifacts. And so there's other ways of communications that are going to be happening. So, you know, this stuff that we're doing here with the screen, like, this is only a tiny scratch, you know, like ultimately, like they want us out wandering in the woods in our smart clothes, like doing Tai Chi and like communicating crystalline concepts, you know, problem solving collectively. And I don't even think that most of the resistance is prepared to get into that headspace yet. And I'm not here to wag my finger and say, I'm better than you and you're less than me. That's not the positionality I want. I'm just walking my own road. And I'm not going to chase people around and tell them what to do. But at the same time, if you want to come into my space and wag fingers at me for doing it wrong, what I get to choose is what to do next. So, you know, I think there is a mess of human weather going on, you know, and I have compassion for people who are trying to position themselves in a really unstable landscape and position themselves psychologically and figure out their own archetypes and reflect on why they chose the archetypes they chose and how they are in relation to other people. But I'm just here to understand the game board as best I can. And I'm grateful to have, you know, an intimate group of people that I can share with. And for now, I'm going to continue to be broader. And I'm going to continue to share this journey more with a broader audience. But I do have my reservations about that. And I see Quantum Heart is there. Like, please forgive me. This has been like, I think this is the other thing that hurts is this person sort of implying that I was some sort of detached, unemotional, disconnected person. Because I've been feeling a lot of really big emotions lately, really big emotions about my family, loss of my job, loss of my dad, you know, in different respects, impending loss of, you know, my family home, the city that I loved. Like, I'm saying goodbye to lots of people, and there was a lot of big emotions attached to that. So I would just ask that the person who tried to presume that I don't have that, that is a projection on their part, and that's because they were trying to fit me into a certain story that was in line with how they needed to envision me for their story. But that's not me. And the only person who can know me is me. So anyway, thanks for joining in. I'll just sort of wind this up now, but definitely check out the two playlists, the Mark Johnson one on meaning making in the body and think about that in relation to fascia. And then think about that in contrast with Michael Levin and what they're talking about with bioelectrical fields. And again, I think ultimately perturbations are going to come our way if we're not along with the fitness landscape, which if you're still on my channel, you're probably more than likely not in the conforming to the main resistance fitness landscape. And like the one thing we still do have choices about how we react. So you know, I can see the game, I can have compassion, I can still sort of stand my ground and ask for your understanding of me as a human being, not a perfect human being, but someone who's walking their own path. And anyway, I guess I've got to go out. It's still snowing and shovel my sidewalk again. So take care, everybody. Bye.